Welcome, and thank you to everyone watching our very first interview, diving into the often overlooked but ever-present community-based outreach and restorative work of the judicial community. Our team here at the Berkeley Judicial Institute hopes that by tuning into this series that we're just starting, but going to continuously expand, that community members and judges alike can learn more about how their two worlds have and can continue to collide by involving themselves in inventive and impactful collaborations through countless different avenues. I'm Vera Wheatley, a current BJI research apprentice, and with me today to delve deeper into how she went about adding new markers of beauty and solidarity to courthouse settings is U.S. Magistrate Judge Celeste Bremer, joining me all the way from Iowa. So hello, thank you so much for being here today and helping us launch this new project that we're really excited about.
It is a good series.
Thank you. Would you mind just introducing yourself really quickly and telling me a little bit more about who you are and where you sit or have sat?
Right. I'm Celeste Bremer. I'm a U.S. Magistrate Judge in Des Moines, Iowa, Southern District of Iowa. I was appointed half-time in 1985, went full-time in 1990. So I've covered quite a distance of different kinds of chief judges, different approaches to court outreach, different priorities for the court, and mix of cases, different ways to try to do more with less. The Prisoner Litigation Reform Act changed a lot of people's case loads and expectations about how and where we were holding court. And then, what I still call the Biden bill, which was the civil court improvements. And so that impact from 1990 forward, again, sets up where the court's priorities are for its day-to-day work, whether it's civil, criminal, prisoner cases, Social Security. You have certain benchmarks and guidelines that you feel you need to do in order to keep your cases rolling. So part of the other concern that I have is then, where does your court fit into your community? One of the reasons, particularly magistrate judges, are the face of their district is because we greet or see every new arrest. And in most districts, we're doing case management. So we certainly see the lawyers in every case. And then a lot of us do mediation. So we see the parties and their lawyers. So we're looking around for how we're using our courthouse space, which sometimes we don't have decent space to work in. And then how are we making our space work for the community?
Right. So obviously the community and where you interact with the community means a lot to you. And I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about how that then developed into the project that we're highlighting today and what came from that passion that you have?
Well, one of the things that I think about is, do people feel welcome to come to a courthouse? And if you want to go way back, you can look up Shirley Abramson's article. She was the chief judge of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and it's called The Woman Has Robes. But she would say whenever they would go on vacation, she would take her kids into the courthouse. You can see eye rolling going on here by her kids. But she goes, they always had clean bathrooms and they always had a place that you could sit. But she would sit in the back and just watch how some other court did business. And she said she would never identify herself and just kind of see how they treated, lady coming in with her couple of sweaty kids and, squirming around in the back. And so, I've thought about that in terms of how welcoming are we to people. Well, in my courthouse, you need a government issued ID to come in. So if you don't have that and a family member is here, perhaps for, some kind of immigration or other kind of situation where you don't really want to identify yourself as being undocumented, there's no way to see with your own eyes how they're being treated or what's going on. I think about, interpreters, both the quality and where do we get them. And again, although we have a need for Hispanic, really Central American interpreters, which is not always Spanish, that we need to have somewhat readily. We don't have a lot of certified interpreters in this district. So is there some way to let the defendant know, what's going to happen next? And so we made a videotape that they can watch in the Marshall's holding area as part of a class I took through the National Judicial Center on, court leadership. And so the challenge for that class was think of something your court needs and then get it done. And then, in 6 months, come back and tell us how you put that together. And, there was no budget for any of this. And about 20 judges in this class did phenomenal work just by leveraging either their relationships or somebody at the bar's relationship. And, they did just, if money was no object and time was no object and whatever you thought your barrier was, well, just get rid of it. So that was a whole new way for me to think about issues and problems. And like, you don't need a giant task force. You don't need to, have a big memorandum of understanding. You can just open yourself up to the universe and say, hey, oh, I like your art. Can you do more? And so through a court history program, I met Ellen Robinson, who taught at the local alternative high school, and Carl Stamey, who taught government. So Ellen taught art. And they did a lot of public installations that were just phenomenal, including one in juvenile court over at our state courthouse that was like a whole kind of Grandma Moses scene of Iowans of many stripes doing all kinds of things. And then from there, their county attorney's office asked, commissioned them to do one about justice. And that was actually pretty dark. The deal with Ellen was you could ask for something, but it was up to the artists and the students to then pick the theme and how it was going to be executed. You didn't get to say, and I'd only like puppies and rainbows, they would the students would work on this, and they would generally work at school because a lot of them had jobs and lives and other commitments. And so one of the reasons this alternative high school worked was because students were there to finish one class at a time, or if they were lucky enough to get maybe a couple credits, for government for coming to the courthouse, and then we would tailor some meetings about that. But for the most part, the students would come and get an idea what the courthouse looked like, and then they would interview employees and judges, and then go back and then come up with a proposal. And if that worked, it worked. And so I was pretty pleased because on the Send Your Love to the Future, which is based on a Sting song, that talks about like you're enough, or you have the ability to control the future, which is a big message for those kids because a lot of them don't think that they have that. So it's like kind of like wavy lines, seagrass almost, but then there's a sun and then it goes through some moon phases. So there's 8 pretty big pieces. And then on the wavy line, so on the bottom was some of the words from the song, but on each wavy line, court employees were invited. And that's another Ellen word, is people get invited to do things. They're not made to do them, and they can say no. Or to either tell the student why they wanted a particular name written or to write it themselves. And so some people, like, I wrote, well, at that time it would be Sandra Day O'Connor because Justice Ginsburg hadn't been appointed. But some people put my name, some people put like a family member's name who had passed. Other people's, were thinking about Iowa legal cases or scholars or lawyers who we all loved or memorialized here. And so it became a very gentle piece, but powerful because of the input.
Right.
So even if you didn't know who some of these people were, you knew it was personal. So I like it. It's still up. And so most of the people who were here, I think we did it in 2007, have moved along, but it doesn't matter because their names are here and their stories are here. So, and the cost, nothing, my time, to meet with the kids once, well, of course, I'll meet with any group of kids and give them a tour and do whatever we want or they want. So we met a couple times and then accepted the proposal, because that's a big deal, is for them to do some public speaking and, present as if they're the artist and we're the client. And then what surprised me was the courtroom that I shared at that time with I can't remember if he was senior at that time, but he was senior in status and demeanor to me as a district court judge. I mean, he was someone that I was very in awe of. So we shared a courtroom, and I thought, oh, he's not going to agree to have this high school art loosey-goosey, send your love into the future. You've got power, you've got a stake in the world. And he did. So we had it in the courtroom, which, again, not a lot of courtrooms just have art installed. Sometimes as part of art, art and architecture, the 0.5% that you have to spend from your budget on a new building for art, which is a formalized process where you get art with a capital A. So a lot of places, a lot of courtrooms don't have art because you don't want something that a juror could see and be offended or make them think of XYZ or whatever. So this was a pretty neutral but powerful piece. And lots of times jurors would ask about it, or family member or people who worked here would bring a family member back to see where they had put their name in the courthouse, which is pretty cool.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that you see every day, especially not art that's so connected to the community and the people that you actually serve.
Well, and again, some of it was, names of people you could recognize, like, oh, well, you'd have to be from Iowa to know about our, counter case, or Clark versus Board of Education, or Edna Griffin, or, some other early civil rights cases. So there's a little bit of inside baseball there. There's names of contemporary people who were contemporary 2007 people, but whatever was going on, or Supreme Court justices, or then there's other Iowa anchors, because the kids got to write names of their family members or themselves. And so it was just very interesting to see. I think the other thing that Ellen taught me is a lot of people don't get to make marks. A lot of people don't get to have some sort of permanent mark to the institution. And so we talk about being a court family. We talk about the importance of, working together in teamwork, but do we honor that, and in a way that everybody can see? So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, when you look back on it and reflect on how it impacted the students, how do you think being able to leave that mark and be invited into that space that sometimes can feel so restricted or closed off, how do you think it impacted them?
Well, one of the things, at the time I had kids who were, in high school, well, let's say high school, I don't know, because I did this for a long time at a lot of sites with Ellen and Judge Cohen. But I would think about how my kids own the space, whether we came in the front door, the side door. I mean, they were used to court security being there to help them or to protect me. They would watch people stand up when I, came into the courtroom, but ho hum, that was mom. Like, fine. I would do stuff with their classes, either bring them to a naturalization, or we did another fun program where everything was we started in English, switched everybody to Spanish. And of course, not all the kids spoke Spanish. And so the solution was just to talk louder, as one does in a foreign language, and took 2 of the kids down and had them booked in, and then brought back up and did an initial parents arraignment. But everybody is speaking Spanish and there's only one interpreter. And I mean, their eyes were as big as saucers because they had never been in that position where they didn't have power and they didn't know what was going on. So for a pretty affluent, dominantly white high school experience, for their justice class, that I just wanted them to understand that not everybody comes to this with the same sort of, privilege and power. And so I wanted to give that to Ellen's students, who a lot of them were in the, juvenile justice system or criminal justice system in some fashion, or a lot of their families were in because of fracturing issues in their families. A lot of them were single parents, so they were trying to raise a baby and go to high school and work 2 jobs. So like walking around a courthouse wasn't anything they ever did, or if they did, it was because something was happening to them. So to me, that was the gift from us, was to give them a sense that you can come in here whenever you want. You can come and show your mom your art. You can watch what's going on. And as a member of the community, you witness this, and the court belongs to the community. And if you fast forward to current century and times, what really bothered me when I watched a lot of protests, and in not only the George Floyd ones in Minneapolis, but in other places, particularly Portland, where the goal was to get to the courthouse and possibly burn it. There were some protests here, and I would say the average Des Moines citizen couldn't pick the federal courthouse out of a lineup. I mean, they don't have we don't have a lot of traffic in the building. We don't have a lot of reason that you are here, because we're just a courthouse. There's no federal offices. There's a federal building a couple blocks away. So if you want to go to Social Security or IRS or Homeland Security, you go over there. So, the percent of the population that even knows what we do here is pretty limited. And I don't think that our building was a target, except we provided rocks as part of our landscaping. So as people walked by and read the sign that said U.S. Courthouse, they also picked up a rock and threw it and broke some windows. But I'm like, why would you do that? It's like, why would you feel that you had permission to throw a rock at my building, or that it said something if you threw a rock at my building? Now, they also broke all the windows of the tire store across the street. So I really think it was more window breaking than it was courthouse targeting. But in some communities, the courthouse was the target, whether it was state or federal, because people felt that the courts, didn't understand the community, were part of the system that over prosecutes, over incarcerates people of color, that don't, that are out of balance for people of privilege and people with not as much privilege. And so I want people to come in and see what we do and feel like they own the joint.
Yes.
And so my approach is courthouses should be a good, civic, robust public space. Now, the marshals and people who have been shot at and who had, rocks come through their chambers are thinking, Celeste, maybe you could take that down a notch. Maybe we need a little better security, better buffer, better insulation of the work of the court from the public. I'd still say, oh, come on in. This is a lively place. You belong here. We have air conditioning. We have clean bathrooms. So going back to Shirley Abramson,
right.
Might not know what we're doing, but come on in and watch. So
Yeah.
I think there's that tension in both design of courthouses, function of courthouses, and your responsibility to the community. So anytime I could have groups come in, I was excited to have them in, and we would just make it work.
Yeah. It's really hard for me to imagine the narrative being able to shift if you only let the story be told by a select few. So I think giving the keyboard or the pencil to those who have such nuanced and differing perspectives is just such an important way to make change, especially in youth. I mean, what came to be the most impactful part of this process for you? I'm also interested in your experience through all of this.
Well, what I liked was, General Services Administration, who is our landlords. So they really need to provide the technical support to put anything on a wall or to maintain something. They were so taken with it, they invited the students to do this huge retaining wall that went around the federal daycare center, which is about a mile and a half from here, because post Oklahoma City bombing of the courthouse, we don't have daycare centers in courthouses anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's at a really busy street corner. And for, I'm sure, over 10 years, that mural was there called A Procession of Iowans. And it was just a whole bunch of different people in silhouette, little kids, big kids, able people, not so able. And that was never tagged and never graffitied.
Wow, so that's something.
That's huge, because how could, hello, there's all kinds of graffiti and tagging and stuff here, but that was always left alone. And it didn't say art by Scavo students, it just says A Procession of Iowans. So I think the fact that, it became acceptable for GSA to reach out and institutionalize their art. So at the federal building, as part of the Consider the Stairs program, where you're urged to go up and down the stairs instead of the elevator, the Scavo kids did 11 stairwells, 11-story building on 2 columns. And so they decorated each of those by themselves or developing the theme. And so I think it gives the students a lot of confidence. And that's what I like to see, was that they felt that they could talk to me or talk to another staff person, whatever, And so I thought that was fulfilling of our mission at a pretty low entry level cost.
Right.
You didn't have to have a big assembly and handouts and swag bags and scripts and, and we've done those. We've done a great program about Brown versus Board of Ed, or the Tinker case, which happened in Des Moines, Iowa, the black armband case, with a group of high school students from here by Zoom with a group in St. Louis. And that was through the 8th Circuit Court Outreach Coordinator. And so each set of kids represented either the school district or the students and had lawyers working with them during the day. And then they argued against each other. So again, but it was a way for them to see how kids, who are these kids in St. Louis, or who are these kids in Des Moines? And, at a time, particularly COVID and, expenses for public schools, or they just don't have the money. So a way to get people into a courtroom without having to bus a couple hundred people one place or the other. So it gets back to, you just have to just recast the question, is not what can I afford to do? What do I have permission to do? What would be normal? Because we've already know I bypassed normal, decades ago. But, so what would make somebody happy? And then if it lasts, great. If it doesn't, well, I'd take it down and replace it next year. So I sent you the picture of the big giant car parts, like the big Chevelle hood that was very decorated. And people just got a kick out of that. So that's okay too,
Mm-hmm.
And as long as it just kind of makes you think, or even say, I'm sorry, there seems to be a big car hood in your hallway. Why is that there? Or why are those hubcaps there? And then it just gets a conversation started. So, So it doesn't have to be big, fancy, dancy, capital A art. Although, I would pay for Tom Otter's art any day of the week, because his stuff is always a little social commentary, just a little nudge to make you think. But I would pay for beautiful art because it's beautiful. I would pay for a quiet space because sometimes you need a place to just be quiet. So it doesn't, you don't have to be building Disney World 3 at your courthouse, but I do think you do need to have a way that the public feels it's okay to come in, and we don't know why we want to go in there, but let's go in. So that's what I thought. There you go.
It helps a lot to know how low budget and yet so high impact something like this can be. And to wrap it up, I was just wondering for any final pieces of advice for anyone who's feeling inspired or interested in implementing a similar project like this in one of their courthouses.
Well, I think, look at where your network is. So if you don't have kids or a Girl Scout troop or, a bunch of kids on probation at your beck and call, there's state court judges who know that, because there's a lot of good state court, what I call bridge programs for kids who are going to age out of the foster system, or kids who need a little bit more attention or structure or something. And so if you don't have that, because that really isn't our population, then just go over to your state court and sit around and look, or ask an inn of court to work with you, or your state bar, young lawyer section or juvenile court section. And you don't know what you don't know. And so it wouldn't have occurred to me to say, hey, could you take 8 pieces of big paper and put some wavy lines on them in a poem? Well, I needed Ellen Robinson to plug that together. And so just take a workshop in something you don't know how to do, and then see if you can do it. Or walk around and ask GSA, what do you wish you had here? Lots of times I'll ask the court, security officers, what do you wish we had? Well, probably not big bins of rocks, has been a conclusion. Well, it kept the weeds down, so things change, and maybe you need to get yourself out of the building and walk around and see what's going on, and see, is there some way you can contribute, or let a farmer's market use your backyard, or do, there's ways that you can integrate yourselves into the community better. And as federal courts, we're pretty good about staying away, because we're generally not built for casual drop by friends. But I think you can look and say, is my building, can you even find the front door? Where's your accessible front door? Well, it's not the front, which isn't really good ADA design. But so what physical barriers do we have to letting people in the building? And then what just emotional or, societal barriers do people think, well, I don't have any business going there. So,
right. So take a step back, ask new questions, expand your horizons, and
get a box of crayons.
Get a box of crayons.
Find an art teacher, because again, I don't know a lot about the making of art or making of marks, but I've certainly learned about it, and now certainly respect it a lot more and appreciate it when I see somebody's been very intentional with their space, either to take the temperature down or the security down. Like I have a bin under the bench of our prison makes Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls out of leftover material, the blue jeans and the blue work shirts that they have there, and some 1,000-year-old draperies, because every once in a while these other weird patterns come up. But I also noticed that these little dolls, cloth dolls, didn't have hearts. So I had to go through the box with my red magic marker and put a heart on them, because Raggedy Ann has a heart. But if there's little kids in the courtroom, which I always think this is hard enough. And we don't get a lot of little kids. So imagine in state court. But, then I would make sure that the clerk would give the public defender some dolls to give to the family. And it wasn't from me, but at least it wasn't like a totally like nothing good happened today experience. So again, how did I find out about that? Well, a state court judge said, you can get free dolls from Prison Industries. I'm like, really? And so apparently you can. And so just ask, just look around and ask. So
yeah, I think what you've done with your space is so beautiful and so inspiring. And I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot from it. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience with us today. And
Okay.
for starting us off on such a strong note. It means a lot.
Well, I'm of the, we can always ask forgiveness and not permission. Because sometimes if you start thinking, oh, I need a task force and I need a budget and I need a process and I need a point A and a point B and an end, yeah, or not. Or you say,
Or
hey, you want to bring some, chalk and paint and decorate a place? So you could do that.
not.
And, if somebody wants to paint over it next year, it's okay. So, I mean, I think that's the other thing is to let it go, send your love into the future. So,
Mm-hmm.
and give me a call because I got 1,000,000,000 ideas that it would be fun to do in many places. So get some kids involved or get some seniors involved or get some non-traditional customers involved and see what you learn.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hey, well, thanks to BJI for always putting new ideas out there.
We appreciate you. Thank you so
All
much.
right, thank you.